Hi everyone. A few weeks ago I made a video called Hello, which was thanking all of you for subscribing to my channel because I reached 10,000 subscribers, which is amazing. And as is the thing here on YouTube, I want to do a Q&A, and so I asked for your questions and you gave me some really great ones and interesting ones. And so I thought I would answer your questions today while I'm doing some holiday baking. So I'm having a Christmas party tomorrow, and I always bake a lot of stuff for the day before. So while I'm doing that baking, I thought I would answer your questions and it would be fun. So I've made a number of things so far. Sorry, the light is weird. I think it's gonna keep going in and out. So I've made some Pfeffernuss biscuits, which are these Austrian spice biscuits. I've made quite a lot of them because they're very popular. And I made some chocolate star cookies. These are 5-spice chocolate star cookies with almonds. And I've made some white chocolate Rice Krispie treats with silver Smarties on top of them. I always make these really every year, and I've made them for years and years and years now. And I've also made some of my famous, or at least in my mind they're famous, they're not really famous to anybody else, my Latvian bacon and onion rolls, which I demonstrated a recipe for last year when I was doing a review of a Latvian novel. And at the moment I'm making some sour cherry amaretti, which is from an ottolenghi recipe, where it's basically whipped egg whites with some honey and some almond mixed with sugar and lemon zest and chopped sour cherries, and it makes this very sticky mixture, which then I roll into irregular balls. It feels funny saying irregular balls, yeah, and then I put icing sugar on them, and I'm going to make about 60 of them before I bake them. So you can see I've done some hanging up of lights in the background, but I have my tree, which I've put up here and not decorated yet. I'm going to do that this evening after hopefully I do a lot of the baking that I want to for today. I'll do a bit more tomorrow. It's always like a baking frenzy, but I really enjoy it because I can just listen to Christmas music or to the Sugar Babes and relax and do a lot of baking, and though it takes a lot of willpower not to eat everything while I'm baking it. But anyway, I'm going to get to your questions now while I'm rolling this mixture and putting it on the trays. So a few people asked me about moving to the UK, and somebody asked, when did you move outside of the US and become an expat? So I moved in March 2000, and just haven't come back since then, though I came to study here in 1999, but then I met my partner here in that year, and we decided we wanted to try to live together, and so I just moved here after I finished university in Vermont, and have been here ever since. And I was only supposed to be here for 6 months, and just ended up staying for much longer because I loved it so much. Robert asks, why did you move to England? And so I have to be totally honest. I moved here out of spite because I was in a relationship before I first came here in 1999. I had been with a boyfriend for about a year, and we were living together and we were getting along great. He was a bit older than me. We were at the same college, and he was just a year ahead of me. And so he finished and graduated, and then moved back to Seattle, which is where he had lived before. And I thought that I was going to move there and be there with him, but I guess he had other plans, because which he never really told me about. We didn't sort of break up or anything. He just moved there, and we gradually got out of contact. And I kept, sort of saying to him like, oh, am I gonna, after I graduate, should I move there and we can move in together and be together again? But then he just sort of kept avoiding that question, and until I finally realized, like, oh, I guess I should make other plans. And so I thought, well, what can I do? And I saw this flyer talking about a study abroad program in England. So I thought, I'll go to England, and he will be so jealous, and he will regret giving me up, and so yeah, so I signed up to the program because out of spite, because of that reason. And then it was so satisfying when just shortly before I came to England, we were messaging each other, and I said, oh, so casually, oh yeah, I'm moving to England soon, to study there, so I might not be in that much contact anymore. And he wrote back really resentfully, like, oh, I can't believe I didn't even know that you were moving to England. And so, the whole thing was just for that moment, just so I could with satisfaction be like, yeah, I'm going to England. So how silly is that? But, I think a lot of our biggest decisions in life end up being, for these silly reasons and out of coincidence that we just end up somewhere which we didn't really expect we would end up, and then there we are. So following on from that, Susie asks, curious as to why you ended up living in England, your contrasts about living in England versus the US. Now, one big contrast, I would say, I mean, it's a bit hard for me to say because, like I said, I've been living here so long, since 2000, basically my whole adult life. So I don't really know what it's like living in the US as a proper adult. I mean, I went to university and college there, and I lived in Boston and then in Vermont on my own. But then, I don't know what it's been like since then. And I mean, one of the big contrasting things I would say is healthcare. There's nationalized healthcare in the UK, and I'm so grateful for that because, I mean, I've never had to use it, thankfully, but I've known people who have, and I know people in the US who have had health problems and have had to rely on private health care or on trying to get their insurance to pay for it, and it's just a nightmare. It's such a mess, and I know people who've not gone to the doctor even though when they really should in the US because they're afraid of having to pay for it and having a massive bill and take out loans to pay for healthcare over decades to come, and that's just ridiculous, I think. So yeah, I'm so grateful to be somewhere where there's national health care, and if something does go wrong, then I don't have to stress about it. I can just go and get the treatment I need. So yeah, that's one of the big differences that I'm really grateful for. Sherry asks, how did you decide to move to the UK? It seems to be a good place for book lovers. England has the best bookstores. And I totally agree. In London, I'm spoiled for choice in this city for bookstores. There's so many great ones, from independent ones to then bigger chains that have really great selection of books. And yeah, it's one of my favorite things to do, to go out in the city and just wander around bookstores all day. Next, Claudia asks, from one immigrant to another, because Claudia is German, what do you love most about living in the UK, and what do you find most annoying? So I've sort of already said what I love most about healthcare, and what I find slightly annoying is, although I also say I love the humor of the British people. That's another thing I really love about here, because there's a very low-key sense of humor in the UK, which is very much my vibe, and I really appreciate. So then, something I find really annoying, I mean, I made that proviso because I'm gonna make a big generalization about the British public. A lot of British people, or at least a lot of English people I've met, can be quite judgmental about and have a set way of doing things, and have this sort of attitude that that's the only way to do things. I mean, it's done in sort of a jovial way when comments like this are made, but there is a sense where you can tell they really feel like, oh yeah, this is the correct way to do things, when really it's just sort of cultural differences of different ways of doing things. And there'll just be this sort of sneering attitude towards it sometimes. I can't think of any specific examples at the moment, but just sort of words that are used or ways of doing things. And I've heard other Americans say this, and other people from other nations who come to Britain find this sometimes, this sort of attitude. And I find that quite annoying, because it just comes across as quite snobbish and unnecessary, and so yeah, that's something I find quite annoying. And then Claudia also asks, what do you miss from life in the US, and what don't you miss? And so yeah, a big thing I miss is going to diners. I would love going to like Denny's late at night, or some independent diners, or even like an IHOP late at night. I would go with my friends, and we would just stay up really late, just talking about lots of stuff and eating lots of stuff. And there's not really that diner culture in the UK, so I miss that. But what I don't miss is driving, because I come from Maine and I lived in Vermont. I had to drive in both those places, and I hated driving in the winter, especially when there was snow. And I've never driven in England, and I probably never will, or at least if I can help it, because I really don't like driving. And I'm lucky to have a partner who really likes driving, so if I ever need to drive anywhere, he will drive me, so that's great. Next, Matthew Sciarappa asks, of your cute graphic t-shirts, what are your favorite cute graphic t-shirts? And that's really hard to say, although probably one of my favorites is one of the Golden Girls, because I love the Golden Girls. You know, I've talked about this before and shown off my Chinese box set of the series of the Golden Girls. And yeah, I have a very silly t-shirt from the Swish Embassy, which is just this like gay clothing online retailer, which I bought this Golden Girls t-shirt from, where they're striking this kind of Charlie's Angels style pose all together. And yeah, I really like that. Shawn the Book Maniac asks, when you started your BookTube channel, did it affect your blog? And has your long-term experience of being a blogger affected the way your channel developed? Which is a really interesting question, because yeah, I find it quite difficult sometimes to keep up both my book blog and this YouTube channel. Mainly, I mean, the main tough thing about it is that I find myself repeating myself a lot of the time, and sometimes it feels like I've talked about the same book multiple times, especially when, you know, book prizes come around. And I wonder how boring that is for people. I don't know if you find that boring, but yeah, I feel like I'm repeating myself sometimes. And then, but that can be sort of a good thing, because I find, because I write about almost every book that I read on my book blog, but then when I go to film the video, I can more easily talk about it, or talk about it in a more comprehensive way, because when I first started making videos, I was just sort of blabbing on and trying to gather my thoughts while actually expressing those thoughts. And so yeah, that can be good sometimes. And so yeah, that's one of the big things I've found about keeping up a book blog as well as doing a BookTube channel. And then Shawn also asks, how big is your library? How many books do you have? Is storage an issue? Will you need a bigger house soon? What do you do with your excess books? Do you need my address to take care of that problem? And yes, well, first off, I have no idea how many books I have. It would take me a long time to count. My godson and his sister were over recently, and they were asking me the same question, and I just couldn't answer it. I have no idea. Yeah, storage is a problem. We moved to a new place a couple years ago, so that I would have more storage, but I've already run out of space, so I'll need an even bigger place. And yeah, one day I hope to buy a big, huge cabin out in the woods that I can store all my books in, you know, or a small castle, if I could find that. So yeah, it's a constant problem. Anna asks, asks, if you could erase one book from your memory so that you could have the experience of reading it again for the first time, what would that book be? And yeah, that's a really difficult question. I mean, one book that I really loved reading and would like to go back to is Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude. I read that as a teenager and absolutely loved it. Although obviously that was a long time ago, and I'm sure my experience of rereading now would be very different. I would have a very different perspective on it. Yeah, that book is one that I would like to just go back and experience again for the very first time. Ajez asks, when did you find your drive for reading? When would you update your top 100 novel list? And do you write outside of blogs? So yeah, like I talked about before, I found my drive of reading like when I was quite young, I think, and I've just always had it. I think it's just always been there. And yeah, my top 100 novels list, I made a video about this last year, and I haven't updated it, which I really should, because yeah, it'll be fascinating to go back to in like 10 years time and see if those are still my top books. I mean, they probably wouldn't be. Yeah, writing outside my blog, I really don't. I did write a lot of fiction and stories before and had a lot of drive to do it, but I just lost that somewhere along the way. And for a while I was like, I would tell people like, oh yeah, I'm working on another novel, and and I was for a while, but then I would still say that even if I hadn't written anything for like 6 months or so, and I've just stopped saying that now. I'm not even going to pretend any longer that I'm still writing. I may do one day, but not at the moment. Hannah asks, is there a character you identify with or whom you think of as influencing your development? And one I would say is, this is a very camp answer, but I loved a fantasy series by Terry Brooks when I was a teenager called the Shannara series, and there was a witch character in that novel, and I thought she was so cool. I mean, she was just beautiful and badass, and I just wanted to be her, and yeah, so I would probably say her, that witch in that series. I can't even remember what her name was, but I just absolutely loved her. Clifton asks, is your partner an avid reader? How do you manage your time together, given the amount of time you devote to reading, vlogging, and work? And yeah, it is tricky. But he is a big reader. I mean, he doesn't read quite as much as I do, but he does read a fair amount, especially at nighttime because he has insomnia issues. So he'll read a lot of books in the night, and he's read a lot of books that I haven't read. So yeah, that's really good. And managing our time together, it can be a bit tricky. I mean, I feel like I don't there's not that often when I'll say like, oh, I can't spend the evening with you because I'm doing vlogging stuff, or I want to sit down and write a book review, or I want to read. We spend a lot of time together, pretty much all of our time together, and so I find it really amazing that we can still get along so well, spending so much time together. I mean, I would get tired of me spending that much time with myself, but yeah, it's really wonderful. We're just really compatible in that way, and he's really busy too. He works in the film industry, and he's often out doing glamorous film stuff, and so when he's out doing that for an evening, I'll stay in and do booky stuff. Sue asks, could you tell us a bit more about your novel Enough? And yeah, so I wrote this novel called Enough, and it's about a relationship between a husband and a wife and the breakdown of their relationship, and it sort of traces that. But it's also, I was mainly inspired to write it because of the Challenger space shuttle explosion that happened in the 80s, which, if you remember, that was the first space shuttle which was supposed to have a civilian on it, well, which did have a civilian on it who was a teacher from New Hampshire, and that space shuttle exploded as it was taking off, and that was a big thing, a big memory of mine from my childhood. It really struck me as quite a poignant moment of sort of the limits of what we could do as a society. It was supposed to be this big, inspiring thing, and it ended in tragedy. And so I took that as the basis of that, and wrote a fictional account of somebody who might have gone on that mission, but who didn't end up going on that mission. And so I sort of took as inspiration inspiration that teacher's life, and wrote a story which has nothing biographically to do with her, but as somebody who was very idealistic and wanted to take part in this big mission to outer space, but who it didn't work out for. And so it's about basically those two things. Carlos asks, have you ever considered to make a video talking about European literature? Because I made one talking about Latvian literature, and I haven't really considered it because that one about Latvian literature was quite special because it was exploring my heritage, my family heritage, while also exploring current Latvian literature. And I would like to, but it would take a lot of work, and I just don't know if, unless I was sort of like commissioned to do it, I couldn't see myself doing a big video like that and going to another country and talking about country's literature in that way. The lovely Marc Nash asks, how do you get to hear about new releases and lit events well ahead of time? And it's a sort of a combination thing of both following bookish people on social media, and so I'll just happen to see book events that they post about, or follow things like Waterstones and Foils and the London Review Bookshop, and they'll post about their events that they have coming up, and I sign up to their newsletters, of course. And just recently I randomly saw somebody talking about how Anne Tyler is coming to the UK in March, which is super exciting. She's one of my favorite authors, and I've never seen her give a talk in person, so I'm so excited about that. And I just randomly saw that on Twitter, and so that was really great, and I booked for that. It's through the British Library if anybody's interested in going to that. And new releases, it's sort of the same thing of people talking about them on social media, but now a lot of publishers will contact me too if books are coming in. If they have some big book that they want to give a big push to, they'll contact me in advance and let me know about it. So there's a whole combination of things like that. Draw Your Book asks, what did you study at university? And this is sort of complicated thing because I had a really rocky, uneven university career. So I first went to college in Boston to study social work at a very small college called Wheelock near the Fenway. And then I just sort of realized that wasn't going to be for me. I didn't think I would really enjoy that job, and so then I just decided to follow my passion for fiction and studied fiction a lot more, as well as creative writing. And I transferred to Goddard College in Vermont, where I studied a lot of fiction and creative writing. And my very final term at Goddard, I was writing this novel enough. Basically, the entire semester, all I did was write this novel. That was my big project, because it's at Goddard, it's student designed education. You can just do basically what you want. So yeah, that was really great. And then I had 6 months in the UK where I was studying fiction at the University of East Anglia. So but then after I moved to the UK, I did a master's degree as well in studies in fiction, which was really, I mainly did it as an excuse to stay in the UK because my work visa had come to an end and I wanted to be able to stay here. And so I did that degree. But obviously I wanted to study fiction as well because I love it. Next, the wonderful Britta Böhler asks, if you had to describe yourself in 5 adjectives, what would they be? And that's tricky. I'd probably say loving and quiet and thoughtful and introspective and cuddly, because I really love to cuddle. She also asks, which 5 books coming out in the beginning of 2020 are you most looking forward to? And that's a big question. I'm sure I'm going to make a whole video about my most anticipated releases of next year, but just off the top of my head, Garth Greenwell's new novel called Cleanness, I think that's what it's called. And there's a novel called The Mercies, which isn't a debut novel, but it's by an author, I can't remember her name, who is a children's author. And this is her first novel for adults. And it's a historical novel set in Norway. Hundreds of years ago about witch trials there, and it sounds really great. I heard the author talking about it. Then there is also, like I said, a new Anne Tyler novel, which I'm very excited about, which she's coming here to the UK to talk about. There is Evie Wilde has a new novel. She's a British author that I really love. I think she's only had 2 like proper full-length novels out. She's done a graphic novel as well. And then Joyce Carol Oates has a new novel, a really massive novel, big chunkster, 750 pages, which I've heard her biographer, Greg Johnson, has told me is one of her best books in many years. So I'm so excited about that. Next, the lovely, lovely Alex asks, how do you think each of the Bronte sisters would take their coffee? I love random questions like this. And I have to say, first off, I'm a tea drinker. I don't drink coffee, so I'm not the best person to ask about this. But if I had to give an answer, I would probably say that Anne would have a cappuccino with 5 sugars, that Emily would probably have an iced mochaccino. I don't even know if that's a thing, but yeah, I would say that's what she would have. And then Charlotte would have her coffee black with no sugar. Karen, the lovely Karen, also asks quite a random question. When you travel and stay in hotels, do you take the little bottles of shampoo? And yes, I do. I have a whole big box filled with little bottles of shampoo. Don't know why I take them. I think it's this like thrifty American thing I have that my parents instilled in me. My father, whenever he goes to fast food restaurants, he always takes the ketchup packets, and his glove compartment is filled with these little ketchup packets. You know, we never use them, but we store them up, and just like the little bottles of shampoo, we never use them. But I have a whole drawer filled with them. Patrick asks, I know this is like picking a favorite child, but which Joyce Carol Oates novel is your favorite? Which collection of short stories? Do you have any recommendations for a first-time reader to start her work with? And yeah, I've made 2 videos actually about Joyce Carol Oates, talking about where to start in reading her. But I don't mind this question. I love this question because, you know, I love talking about Joyce Carol Oates. And so probably my favorite novel by her is Blonde. I mean, it's the novel that I wrote my MA dissertation on, as well as Susan Sontag's novel In America. I wrote about both of those novels. And yeah, I love her novel Blonde. It's such an amazing book about the life of Norma Jean Baker, but also just about the way that we sell ourselves. We're taught to sell ourselves in this capitalist society. And yeah, I think it's so moving and meaningful. For short stories, I mean, I would say that collection Lovely Dark Deep, which I talked about in my favorite books of the decade. And for a first book, one I always recommend is Joyce Carol Oates' novel, The Gravedigger's Daughter, because it just encompasses a lot of her major themes and her style of writing, this sort of realist style of writing. And yeah, so those would be my suggestions of where to start. Okay, I finished making my mixture, and I think I've made about 60 of them. So I have all these irregular balls, which I'm going to bake now, and then get on and make the next dish, which I think is a vegetable pate I'm going to make that can be put on some crisp bread to serve around, because it's good to have savory things as well as sweet things, though I mainly make the sweet things. So I'm going to bake these, and then I'm going to answer more questions while they're baking. Okay, next, Blanca says, are you happy Lucy Ellman won the Goldsmiths Prize? And yes, I am happy. I think it's slightly cooler to win the Goldsmiths Prize than the Booker Prize. Then Daryl asks, how long did it take you to read Ducks Newburyport? And it took me a little over 2 weeks, I'd say about 2.5 weeks of really dedicated dedicated reading. Like as soon as I woke up, I would get a big cup of tea and then just start reading for as long as I could until I had to go to work. And then at my lunchtime and in the evening, and so just reading it in a really dedicated way. Tootight Lautrec asks, I love Tootight Lautrec. I mean, how amazing is it that we have BookTube and we have a drag queen on BookTube who reads out Shakespeare sonnets? I mean, it's amazing. It's so wonderful. BookTube is a wonderful place. So Tootight asks, can you remember the very first book you ever read? And yeah, I can. There's a book called How to Be a Perfect Person in Just 5 Days? Is it 5 days or maybe 3 days? It might be 3 days. Yeah, so it's this children's book, and it was about this boy who was awkward and wanted to be a perfect person, and he found this book about how to become a perfect person. And basically the conclusion of it was, the moral of the story was that being a boring person is really dull, that perfect people just sit there quietly sipping weak tea all day long. And so it's much better to just be like zany and fun but I sort of took from that was that, oh, actually, no, I think it would be perfect to just sit around sipping weak tea all day. I wish I could spend my whole existence doing that. So the moral of the story was slightly lost on me. Next, the lovely Jacqueline asks whether you have any specific goals for your reading platforms. Yeah, that's an interesting question, but no, I don't really have any specific goals other than to meet lovely bookish people such as yourself, to talk about books with. I mean, that's really my main goal, but also to record what I've read, because I find it so easy to forget what I've read, just even like in the past month. I mean, I'll meet somebody at like a party or something, and they'll say, oh, you're a big reader, what have you read recently that you really liked? And I'm like, oh, I can't really remember. Just let me check my blog to find out what I read recently, because I find it so easy to forget. And yeah, so I don't have any really major goals other than that, other than meeting nice bookish people and having conversations about this. I mean, it's lovely having contact with publishers and sometimes getting an offer to judge a book prize or something like that, or interview an author. I mean, that's all really lovely bonus stuff. But yeah, the main thing is just to meet other readers. And then Jacqueline also asks, because she's big on Australian literature, is what is your favorite book by an Aussie author? And I have to say it's Breath by Tim Winton. I just love that novel so much, and I mean, I love all of his writing, but and I need to read more of it. But yeah, that novel has a very special place in my heart, and I think it's absolutely wonderful. But also Trent Dalton's his debut novel that came out earlier this year. I love that too. I thought that was such a great novel, and I'll be so excited to read more by him. Then Charlie asks, is there any genre of books you don't like or don't like reading? And I mean, I would say no. I mean, I mainly read contemporary literary fiction. There's nothing I think I would actively avoid. I mean, I wouldn't go out to read a book of, erotica or, and I don't read much like fantasy or anything like that anymore. But, I wouldn't say no to it. And, I like that book prizes, like the Booker Prize last year included a graphic novel and a crime novel. Not that I read the crime novel on it, but if I had more time, I would have read it. Next, Jack asks, how do you manage your reading life? How do you choose what book to read next? And it's really a whole number of factors. I mean, sometimes it's a book that I'll have heard talked about here on BookTube and made me really interested in and wanted to read it. Other times it was a book that a publisher kindly sent me and that I think sounds really interesting, or it's a book by a favorite author that I'm excited to read their new work. So yeah, it's a whole number of factors, or it's personal recommendations from friends I know in real life, or it might be just a shallow thing of like, I like the book's cover. I think the cover is really pretty, so I want to try reading it. For Ferdinand asks, do you do audiobooks? And yes, I do. Actually, audiobooks is something I've been listening to a lot more in the past 2 years. And increasingly, I'm enjoying that a lot more, especially because I like doing a lot of walking, and it's just a really nice thing to do while walking around the city is listen to audiobooks. Gia asks, I have trouble remembering most of the novels that I've read about in 6 months, like I was just talking about. Do you think it is normal? And yes, it happens to me. So yeah, I think it's normal. And I've heard a lot of big readers say this, that we'll just forget books that at the time while we're reading it, it can be so meaningful and we can be so moved by it. But then in a few weeks' time, we're like, oh wait, what was that book about? It's just it's just the way that memory works. And so yeah, that is a big reason why I do the blog and this channel, to aid me in remembering what I've read. Bizarre Individual asks, what is your favorite food? What is your favorite place to eat? And what is your favorite place to read? So yeah, my favorite food probably would be pizza. I mean, I know I talked about dim sum in that hello video. I do love dim sum, and I could just eat Chinese dim sum all day long. But also pizza. My boyfriend does a really great homemade pizza. He makes his own dough. That's really good, and that is probably my favorite thing. My favorite place to eat would be, this sounds really pretentious, but it's absolutely true, and it's just so beautiful. I went to Italy once, to the Amalfi Coast, and just outside of Ravello, there's a famous chef called Mama Agata, and you can take a class with her. And as if you take a class with her, you basically just watch her cooking for a few hours, and you participate a little bit, but mostly just watch her. And she prepared this huge Italian feast, and I was just eating and eating. Even after I was full, I was shoving more food in because it was so good and I couldn't get enough of it. And yeah, so that is my favorite place to eat. You sitting there with a view of the coast and the Mediterranean, as well as her lemon groves. It's just so beautiful, and yeah, I could just stay there till I die. And yeah, my favorite place to read is probably in the sofa right behind me in the early morning with a big cup of tea. I have a really big mug cup that I drink my tea out of. Van Houten asks, do you practice any sort of speed reading techniques? And no, I don't. I think I'm quite a slow reader, which I know a lot of people would be surprised by, because it's at least appears that I read so much, even though I know people who seem to read a lot more than I do. And yeah, I wouldn't want to practice any speed reading techniques. I think I enjoy just taking my time with the book and the story and getting into the story and just enjoying it in that way. The wonderful James, who goes by the name Serial Reader, he asks, if Virginia Woolf were a contemporary writer, what do you think her approach to fiction would look like? If she were to write the same novels, how different would they be? And that's a really interesting question. I would probably say they would look like Jeanette Winterson's novels, because Jeanette Winterson is a massive Virginia Woolf fan, and Virginia Woolf was a big experimenter, and Jeanette Winterson gets really experimental in her fiction. And so yeah, I think Virginia Woolf would probably respond to the contemporary world by using those same sort of techniques that Jeanette Winterson does to try to capture modern experience, because that's what Virginia Woolf was really trying to do in her fiction. So then he also asks, do you think your reading taste would differ now if you had never left the US? And yeah, that's another really interesting question. I mean, they undoubtedly would. I mean, I would read a lot less current British literature probably, and follow less British book prizes. I'd probably follow the Pulitzer and the National Book Award, which I don't all that much. So yeah, that probably would really change and steer my reading a lot more. And then finally he asks, if you could found a new book prize, what would its focus be? And who would you want to have on the judging panel? That's a really big question, but a really fun and interesting one. And yeah, somebody got in touch with me recently about founding a new book prize for disabled writers, which I think is really exciting and interesting. But it would probably be for debut writers, or it would be for writers over a certain age, because a lot of these book prizes seem geared towards new writers and young writers, and yeah, there should be more book prizes for writers who are over 50. The great writer Penelope Fitzgerald, she didn't start writing until I think after she was 50 years old. So yeah, there should be some book prizes for debut writers who are over 50 years old. That's what I would say. Who would be on the judging panel with me? I don't know. I would like some zany choices like Bjork. It would be really fun to judge a book prize with Bjork. But also with the drag queen Katya, because she's crazy smart. I don't know how much she reads, but yeah, that would be a really fun and crazy judging panel. Ex Libris asks, Eric and the libraries, do you use them? And no, to my great shame, no, I don't use libraries. I know I really should. It's really bad of me. I should use my local library. And I talked about at the beginning of this year, after reading the library book, that libraries were something I wanted to use more often. But I just find I'm sent so many books and I buy so many books that I just don't end up using my library ever, which I know is really shameful. I know I should. That's going to be a New Year's resolution, again, to use more libraries. Then Dusen asks, most of my bookworm friends are also perfume lovers, so I'd like to know if you wear perfume. No, I don't. I don't have an aversion to it. I would like to read. I would like to wear cologne. If anybody got me cologne for Christmas, I would gladly wear it every once in a while. But I'm just very lazy about my just sort of like getting ready after I shower. I just like to do it as quickly as possible. I have got more into moisturizing. That's something that Matthew Sciarappa has got me more into, and something I really need to do because I have very dry skin. But no, I don't wear any perfumes. He also asks, what's your star sign? And my star sign is Virgo. I don't know what that means really. I don't know much about star signs, but I do know that I'm a Virgo. And then finally, the lovely, lovely Laura Frey asks, how did you first connect with JCO? I always assumed it was through your blog, but it seems you've known her longer. And yes, that's true. I have known her longer. So I first got in touch with her when I was at university and I was doing my master's dissertation on her novel Blonde, like I talked about earlier. And I wanted to ask her some questions for this dissertation. So I wrote her a letter asking her, and she wrote me a very polite response saying, sorry, I don't respond to these requests because I get so many of them that I would just end up spending all my time answering questions for people's dissertations. And so that was very kind of her. But when I finished the dissertation, I sent her a copy of it, which she sent me a very nice letter of thanks for it afterwards and complimenting me on it, which was very kind. And sent me a signed copy of her novel Blonde. And yeah, so that was really lovely and thoughtful of her. And so yeah, we would occasionally write to each other after that. And then like I've talked about, we had a mutual friend with Edmund White, and so met up a few times in person. She came to do some book events at the Edinburgh Book Festival, and so I met her there. And yeah, so we've sort of met in person a few times, but then afterwards through my blog and through social media. So coincidentally, we joined Twitter at about the same time. And she very kindly followed me and very kindly retweeted a lot of what I was posting, and so yeah, we just sort of got to know each other on there, and so it's lovely. Now we'll talk about movies every once in a while and things like that, and yeah, so those are all the questions. I'm gonna go check on my biscuits now and take them out of the oven, but thank you for all these questions, and sorry this has gone on way too long, but I want to answer as many questions as possible, and so thank you for that. If you have any more questions, burning questions you want to ask me, let me know in the comments below and I'll try to answer them. But for now, I hope you have a very Merry Christmas if you celebrate Christmas, and very happy holidays to you. And yeah, I'll show you some scenes from the party. Hopefully I'll do a bit of filming from that at the very end, but I'll speak to you again very soon. Thank you for watching, thank you for subscribing, and happy reading everyone. Bye.